A lot of your stuff is so much about the viewer to a certain extent. As the artist, you don't really get to view your own work in a pure way.
No, and I think a lot of these works that are more interesting than mine, I think there is a mechanism for me to sort of be in and out of it, and sort of it's really satisfying to be able to kind of look at your work from the outside, even if it's a kind of a pretend space in a way. But the better the work, the more real that feels.
Yeah. And even the pinhole cut to a certain extent gets at that, in terms of
that was also
almost the accidentalness of it.
Yeah, that was also a piece that I learned a lot from, in the sense of how to when you disengage yourself from like the idea of making a picture and just kind of doing things with the materials that you're supposed to make pictures with, things can become interesting in another way if you're interested in it.
I'm curious about your pre-Columbian installation space. And, I like very much what you said about taking the words off the wall and sort of turning it into this pure experience of looking at the things and how colors change your reaction to them and all of that. And it seemed that was a thread that went through a lot of the speakers today, was sort of giving power back to the actual experience of looking at objects rather than being told how to approach them, but just that sort of visceral reaction, that reflexive thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people don't really talk about when they talk about like the notion of the museum as a frame is it's really more where you're really talking about is mediation. You're not talking about a frame that completes and makes and separates and kind of places the work as an artwork, as opposed to the thing that's next to it, whether it be the wall or another person or your shoes or whatever. But what's very difficult even today for a lot of people to understand, is that if we're really going to talk about kind of inventing and understanding the way people actually communicate and deal with the world, it's like it seems like people are very much interested in this idea of like having some sense of participation in what's being said to them and how it's being mediated. That they really everybody wants to be able to be part of that mediation to some degree, and I think fewer and fewer people are especially kids and stuff, are actually very interested at all, or very feel comfortable at all in this idea that they're consuming.
Well, along those lines, do you find, since when you started, you had a confrontational relationship with curators, has that changed? Are people becoming more receptive to changing our idea of what a museum space is?
It's there. I mean, I think people understand that the stuff that what I do is a little bit more substantial than they thought, or something like that, But the reality is that I do very few museum exhibitions that actually where you're sort of asked to kind of really work in an open way and in a kind of a progressive way. I mean, I think most museums don't really have the culture within them at this point, or maybe never. Who knows? What I do has this sort of funny. It's kind of like it's bifurcated. On the one hand, there's discrete objects that I make, and they're sold in galleries, and they're interesting because they kind of they're like producing drawings, even though they're not on paper. There's things, and a lot of times they're installations, and they're substantial. And then there's the projects that actually that they unfold in the public, whether it be in conjunction with the museum, or whether it be something that I've devised or through patrons or whatever. But I think the work that's really interesting is the ones are the works that have a kind of that are produced with the understanding that we're not really sure what we're going to end up with, and it's very difficult to have that kind of an invitation in a museum, because museums are basically places where people, they want something you've already done and that you've already done well, and you kind of the trajectory for doing museum shows for somebody my age is you do a museum show in New York, and then it goes well, or in Europe, and then all these kind of consequently later all these sort of smaller cities, all over, they want to sort of be part of whatever a Jorge Pardo exhibition is. We don't we don't do that many museum shows. I mean, I've maybe done 5 in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, it's like, but we do a lot of projects that are about that happen by just sort of developing a relationship with a very almost like a traditional patron in a sense, but that patron has empathy for the process and allows you to work in a way that and that's not very common.
Switching gears a little, I was interested in some of the things you were saying about when you were visiting the old houses in Los Angeles and sort of how they affected your understanding of history or convoluted history. Or I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of what do you mean by convoluted history?
Well, I think what I was thinking about when I used the term history was more that LA is like Dallas that's maybe 50 years older.
Yeah.
You know, it's in the sense that this is a place that really is it's historyless. You know, they're really the only thing LA really has is the entertainment industry, which is like the most pervasive cultural machine that exists in the world right now.
Yeah.
And it has this sort of really nice tradition of domestic architecture, modern domestic architecture. Since I was interested in sculpture, it made a lot of sense for me. If I was interested in objects and things, it made a lot of sense for me to really start to scrutinize that architectural tradition, because it was actually functioning in a way that I wanted sculpture to function. You know, and for instance, going to a museum in LA that you know, you're talking 20 years ago. I mean, the collections were very impoverished. They really weren't really representative of what was going on in the contemporary scene in a very sort of in a very dynamic way. And so I just started to become really informed and really kind of influenced by people like Schindler and his students and you know, and much more the more eccentric type of architects that worked in LA, and what was it about LA that allowed for this culture to sort of disseminate in the way that it did, and I saw a lot of there was a lot of enthusiasm in that. It was interesting. And at the same side, I wasn't connected to any kind of an architectural tradition, so it's not like I had architectural colleagues who were interested in sculpture, you know, in a very complex way. It's more like, you know, it's like my wife's a writer, and like most writers think that art is still like, you know, painting pictures and painting portraits and things like that. Even though they're very sophisticated contemporary writers, their idea of how to participate with the art world is really still like from the 19th century. Yeah. And it's the same thing happens with artists and architects. You know, and these fields have kind of irrespectively become so specialized that it's very difficult for these different practices to really share any bottom line that's workable or something like that. So, and because of that, I think I became interested because I sort of saw that dynamic as something as an interesting one to kind of inquire about and see what if you could use it or something like that.
Yeah, especially in newer cities where you're really, I mean, we've discovered that in Dallas, where you're really, the dialogue about art and architecture everywhere they meet is sort of, you know, intrinsic to ever becoming anything. Those dialogues have to be happening, and artists have to be involved in how we understand making places in order for it to be a city anyone ever will care about, or ever will have a history. Like, you're kind of making.
Yeah, and it's, you know, the art and public space programs in most cities and most buildings and most architects are really driven by developers. They're not. Europe is a little better because Europe they have a kind of a. It seems like a lot of times in the better projects they're driven by museum people and cultural people, and but in the States the real bottom line is the artist going to stay out of the way of the architect and still do something interesting, you know, and I don't think that really is a model for interesting collaboration, you know, or it doesn't seem like it, you know, and I think And I think when it's interesting is when both people are actually thinking through the same problem with different modes of information.